Hello everyone, I'm Samantha Jane Smith.
And I'm Jacob Keynes, and you are listening to the Classical Queer Podcast.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the next episode of the Classical Queer Podcast. This week we're very pleased to have with us Australian composer Matt Webster. Hi Matt.
Hey there.
It's nice to see you. Maybe I'll just say a little bit about a couple of years ago, I heard one of your pieces called Cassini, which actually was about the space probe, the NASA space probe.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was this is how I kind of got to know you, because I'm being a space geek. That was kind of the thing that I saw, and I started listening to, Cassini, great, fantastic, and hence I've known Matt now we've probably communicated for a couple of years now, I think, on and off. So it was great.
Yeah, I think it's been about 3.5, which is quite impressive.
Oh gosh, really?
Wow. Yeah.
it seems, time flies, doesn't it? Time flies. So we'll start today, Matt. Maybe what we normally do is ask you to say a little bit about yourself and your background and anything else you'd like the listeners to know.
Yeah, sure. So, hello, I'm Matt, as we know. I'm a LGBT plus composer from Australia. I've been composing orchestral music since I was about 16, I'd say. So I'm 30 now. I just turned 30 this year. So just under 15 years. I've never had any formal training or anything like that with composing or music, actually. Very much in the self-taught camp, but I think I've had just the right series of fortunate events to somehow make a career out of it, which is really exciting. And yeah, I'm not very exciting, unfortunately.
I mean, we beg to differ, but sure.
Yeah, I mean, I find it amazing. I mean, as I always say in this thing, I have no musical ability. I find it amazing that somebody who's had no training and can make a career in classical music, which is one of the hardest things to have a career in. I find that quite an interesting story in and of itself. I mean, what were some of the things along the way that got you into this?
So funnily enough, the very first thing that made me ever want to be, that got me interested in composing was when I was 15, I went to the films with a few of my friends in school, and we saw the Da Vinci Code, which, not a great film, but Hans Zimmer wrote some of the most amazing music for it. And I remember sitting there just being like, oh, I want to do this. And that that was the catalyst for everything. I went out, I got a free composing software for the computer and just kind of started. And a year later, I won the under 18 section of an international composing competition. So
I think that says something about you quite a lot, don't you think? I think this says a lot that
I do. I think it's so. I mean, we're always going to talk about the pieces, the sections that we're going to listen to, but the first thing I thought of, and I listen to a lot of music. I listen to a lot of composers and a lot of new music in my life, and I was listening, and I tend to put things on like passively first. Like I put them on once just in the background and I let it absorb, and then I'll listen to it more thoroughly and whatever. And I was like typing away and I was listening to your work, and I had to stop and I had to like actually listen on the first run, which to me is like a really good indication that there's like something really complex happening. Because I actually had to like stop and listen on my most passive first run of things. But I think it, to me, sounds like you're free of so many different rules that a lot of composers put on themselves, and it just sounds much more fluid, and you go wherever you want to go with your pieces rather than going where it should, quote unquote, go. But I mean, what do you think about that? Is that like a non-training background type of situation that you were never those things were never imposed on you? Do you feel like
Honestly,
you have
I
the ability to
wonder.
go?
I feel like it probably does relate quite strongly to the lack of training in a way. In that, it's a lot of people I know who went to a music conservatory that taught the very, very rigid rules first, and that's all drilled into them before they're then allowed to develop their own voice as a composer. So I think kind of missing out on that level and just always writing what I hear or what I feel, as you said, kind of creates that level of fluidity into where something can move and those unexpected changes. And of course, the subject matter of whatever piece I'm writing at any given time can have a massive impact on that. And we'll get a bit more into that as we go through some of the pieces. But just quickly touching back on the Cassini piece that Sammy was just talking about before. So that was my first ever properly recorded piece by a full orchestra. So I'd done a lot of composing with VSTs or smaller ensembles. I built a bit of a career for myself in Australia writing incidental music for theatre. So I've had a play that's travelled around Australia that I wrote a score for that was just solo cello. So there was a live cello on stage with the play, which was really cool. But we also travelled to Monaco to perform at the Mondial du Théâtre, which is that international festival of theatre. And the Prince of Monaco came to watch us, which was very cool. But and so it kind of all has happened really intensely in the last 5 years or so. I was kind of just doing my own thing, just writing for my own enjoyment. And then, I managed to meet one person who introduced me to someone else who was a director. And then suddenly I was getting all these composing gigs for theatre and all that money started coming in. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to hire an orchestra and do it properly. I've always wanted to hear how my music will translate. And I remember, so that was just a half-hour recording session with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra for the Cassini piece. And I remember calling my best friend as soon as it finished at 2 a.m, basically in tears, being like, it sounded exactly as I imagined. You hear horror stories of composers who have written for samples before and then move to a live orchestra and things aren't balanced or they're not playable in the way they thought they were. But that wasn't an issue at all for the Cassini piece, and that was just the most thrilling experience to know that my own voice is valid and achievable, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
I think the thing I loved about that piece was, and I think this is kind of the thing I think we'll come back to in your other music, is it's kind of very evocative of the subject you're talking about. For me, as I said, the Cassini piece was Cassini. It was almost like it was designed for, but it almost like they went together so well. And it was very evocative of all the things that I knew about Cassini and this kind of thing. And I think I want to use the word, it's almost cinematic in a way, the music, in the sense that it made me think of pictures of these things. So it was kind of an interesting experience. It actually made me think of that. And I think that was kind of a really, really fascinating thing to happen, I think.
Well, look, first of all, I'm very glad to hear that. Because that's, when I write, that's a lot. I write, and this has always been something that I've known in the back of my head. I write program music. I don't write absolute music in the sense that every piece I write has a story to tell, even if that story is just an emotion. But it's never just music for the sake of music. I think because I fell in love with film scoring when I was younger, that's really influenced. So even though, a lot of the music I write these days, I still consider fit for the concert stage, it's not absolute, early classical kind of orchestral music in the way that it goes. And so it's really nice to hear that, a piece like Cassini is just so ingrained in that same idea. When you hear it, it tells the story so perfectly.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think that's kind of the message I get from your music, is this, is a cinematic background early on. And I can understand also from the theatrical point of view that that's kind of similar. You get this combined with the fact that you probably don't follow the classical sort of way of writing music. So you tend to get, in my view, a lot of very sort of sudden dramatic sort of things, which you don't always get in some classical music. You know, we're going to build up to a dramatic thing. We know it's going to happen, but you very quickly go from one to the other sometimes. And that kind of throws you off for a little bit, but it's almost like you're watching a film and something's happened suddenly and this kind of thing. And that I kind of find it's a fascinating experience because it gives you that sort of emotional like kick, as it were.
Yeah. And that's a lot of the time what I'm going for. That's that really raw emotional feel for people when they listen. I do really enjoy randomly changing direction in music, because I don't want the listener to not be paying attention, if that makes sense. So I really force them to kind of experience that sudden emotional shift in whichever direction, because as you can know, it can go from really big to really quiet very suddenly. And you can have a complete melodic and harmonic shift within the space of like 10 seconds, which can really capture the people who are listening.
Do you, in music that you listen to outside of, even if it's orchestral music or film scores, but even like non quote unquote classical, like artsy classical music, do you listen for that type of thing in other musics, like even pop music or?
Not really, actually.
Interesting.
But I have like such a wide range of stuff that I listen to. So, you know, I'll like my favorite classical composer is Rachmaninoff, purely for the drama side of things that you get there.
Definitely drama. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. But you know, like I really enjoy musical theater, because it's again combining that idea of telling a story. And some of the melodies and orchestrations you can get in musical theater are so rich, like Sondheim is just, you just sit there and you're in a whole different world and you're just listening to these really rich harmonies. And again, I find that Sondheim very often goes in directions you're not quite expecting. And that's what makes it so exciting to listen to. But then I also like my really basic top 40 pop stuff. So I don't think, I just like anything that gives me emotion. It doesn't have to be dramatic emotion or anything like that. I need to feel the purpose of the music for me to like it, I think.
We're going to hear some pieces from you. They're all from a new work that's actually, I don't think it's quite out yet, is it? It's coming out soon, but it's called, is it out yet? This too shall pass.
No, it's not.
No, not quite.
Yeah, so
not quite.
It's still out soon. It's still not released, but we're working towards that. Yes. It's an album called "This Too Shall Pass."
Yeah. So maybe you'd like to, it's very much a personal story. And so it's very much a journey as I look at it. So maybe you could tell people a little bit about the story. And also how it came about to actually get this piece of music written and recorded.
Yeah. So the album itself was originally written, I think, oh goodness, 2-3 years ago? I can't even remember. But it all makes sense in a second because I'm going to explain the story of the album. It was, so I also have bipolar disorder. And it's quite severe in its presentation and most. I've been since I was 18, I've been on a never-ending cycle of medications and hospitalizations to try and keep myself alive, basically. Which I know sounds very dramatic, but it's also very true. I'm just going to say 3 years ago. We're just going with 3 years because I cannot remember. I was hospitalized again, and I went through my very first course of electroconvulsive therapy, which, for the listeners who do not know, you're put under a general anesthetic, and then electricity is run through your brain to generate a seizure. I'm not entirely sure how it works, other than kind of this idea of resetting the brain. But it is the only thing that has ever given me any relief from the depression side of my bipolar. I've had several suicide attempts and that kind of thing in my life, and I've been hospitalized on average once a year since I was 18, which is it ends up being a significant portion of your life that disappears. But this album really came through that experience of my very first ECT session, going from, I remember walking into the hospital and telling the psychiatrist very clearly, I was like, either you give me ECT or I'm going to walk out and I'm going to end my life. I'm done. I'm sick of trying. That's how bad it was. And thankfully they gave it to me. So we went through that course. It was a course of 9 sessions, and it was about 2.5 months that I was hospitalized. When I got out, I was feeling the best I'd ever felt in my life. I felt, I had no anxiety. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't manic either. I was just normal, which is a lovely place to be. And that's where this album came from. It's the musical journey of kind of being at that very bottom point of one of the tracks at the very beginning is even called This Is the End. And that is very much where that album starts off. And then it's a musical journey through going through ECT, starting to recover, and then finding beauty and joy in life again.
I think that a lot of people out there will be kind of astonished that somebody who goes through so much of this can write such fantastic music. I think that's the first thing, because your struggles of, and I think we've talked with people on here before. I know that I've struggled with all sorts of things, and other people struggle with these kinds of things. But to struggle over the last years and produce such wonderful music, I think is kind of amazing, at least to me. I having suffered from depression, not bipolar, but depression myself, I couldn't function. So I kind of feel amazing that you've been able to take this and express it in this way. And I think that is, I don't want to say incredible, because I think it really is an amazing experience to listen to, because you can feel what you're going through. And I think that's good. So let's because you mentioned the first part, This Is the End. Let's take a quick listen to that, and then we'll come back and continue.
mean, it's like I said at the beginning. It sounds, and I use the word impulsive in like the best possible way. That it sounds like you follow your impulse and you just allow yourself to go musically where you want to go to express the thing you want to express, which I think is something that composers spend their whole life trying to figure out how to do. And you've you said you just turned 30, like you've managed to figure that out like years and years before like many people figure out how to do that. And so I'm curious what your compositional like process looks like. So you decide like this first portion, like this is the end. You decide your narrowed down topic that you're going to write about, as in this is the bottom part. How do you then start to translate that into the actual work?
I find these questions really tricky because a lot of the time I don't know. It's like I enter a trance and it just kind of happens. So I guess if I give you kind of an overview, like I'll be sitting at my piano at home and I'll be improvising and something will come up and I'll be like, I like that. I want to take that. So I'll go to the computer. And I actually tend to play most of my music into Logic Pro first. So I don't start with notation because it slows me down. So I play everything in really roughly and kind of, it's so hard to explain because it's like it just exists. It's like I'm discovering something that I already knew was there, if that makes sense at all. So the orchestration side of of writing is something I'll sit there and think about and really focus on getting right. But the overall like melodic and harmonic development, it's like a puzzle that I knew existed and I'm just remembering it, which is a very unexciting answer, and I'm so sorry.
No, I think it's equally as exciting as any other possible answer. Like it's really fascinating to think about like unearthing something that's already in existence in your head. It's discovering, like to use your words, like discovering something that already exists, and just putting it into a form that people can hear that replication is like a really fascinating thing. Again, it's talking to so many composers and just like living. I mean, Sammy and I talk to so many people, and I talk to so many composers in my like work life. There's so much. There's and then maybe there's like a weird fantasy we've built up about like composers who struggle and scribble on pages and they like try and work things out and it's so arduous and it's so like fraught with like creative distress. It's really actually quite refreshing to hear that like this is something that you are able to just the process is just finding a method to, like you say, the fastest way to get it into a replicatable thing. The notation slows you down. It's already in existence. You need to get it down faster.
And it's I remember when talking about the play that I wrote music for that traveled around. I remember I am a very mediocre cellist, so I was already I had a cello at home and knew that I'd be writing for a solo cellist, and I kind of just sat there and the same thing happened. I came up with a melody and then from that one like 15-second snippet, the whole score just kind of came into existence. It's so again, for me, the biggest part is the orchestration, like sitting there in Dorico, which I've now moved to because heck yeah, Dorico.
Absolutely. Absolutely Dorico. Yeah.
And like, thinking about different combinations because I get really worried that I do the same thing too often orchestration wise. So, when I was working on the recording for This Too Shall Pass, the whole album, there was a lot of the longest period was just changing it to make it more exciting for a live orchestra. Because I don't want the musician sitting there being like, oh, look, 60 bars of a single note. Cool. That's something that I'm really concerned about as a composer because I want the musician to also have fun. And there are moments where I can see that I achieved that because I also got the video recordings of all the recording sessions. And you can sit there and see the musicians smiling and enjoying themselves as they play it. And to me, that is the best feeling out of everything, because they would be playing music all the time as our full-time job, they're session musicians. They would probably have some stuff that they didn't enjoy, and knowing that they enjoyed my music on whatever level is just really great.
And musicians are not shy about showing when they do not enjoy something.
Oh, they are not. Heck, I'm not. When I perform in, I did some paid work as a pit musician for theatre as well, because of course I did. Me and the other musicians, when we didn't like something, it was very obvious.
It's never struck me, and this is kind of just coming from outside, that you would have to write music to please the musicians. I know that sounds kind of a dumb thing to say, but I kind of never thought of that really, and it makes a lot of sense.
I don't think it's a dumb thing at all. It's, as you said, it's not something people would think about if they weren't actively a musician or hopefully a composer.
We all like our jobs though, and I mean, we all want to have a job which is interesting. So why should musicians be any different? I guess that's what I'm thinking. I like my job, but why should they have to? And it just never struck me, which is why it kind of seems a bit silly, really. So,
well, we all learned something new today, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this is why we're here. We learn some
Absolutely.
stuff. Yeah, we learn a lot of stuff. Yeah. Let's move on to the next piece, and maybe you tell us, introduce this bit of it. It's called Never Alone. So we've had the sort of this is the end, which is the low part, if you like, of
which,
this
by the way,
journey.
quickly, I just want to pause and say, This is the End is fascinating in that it's the second track on the album, and yet emotionally it's the lowest part. Because we're really showing that journey of, so the first track of this album is called From the Shadows. And that one's kind of just expressing the idea that life can be fine, and then suddenly out of nowhere you are at the lowest point. And that's so. I was talking to I had a interview with a Canberra, which is the city I live, magazine about the album and stuff. And we were talking about this idea that the album starts off at the worst and gets better, which normally, in a film, things would be fine. Then they would go down and then come back a bit. Due to the nature of mental illness, we're dealing with something that is terrible at the beginning. And then we're kind of on an up and up with a few drops every now and then.
Absolutely.
But so I just quickly wanted to explain that to everyone as well.
No, I think it's actually a good point to make, because I think for people who haven't had a mental illness, this whole thing about, you're going along in your life and you think things are kind of okay and they're maybe all right, and then suddenly it's not. It's the worst of the worst. It's so low, and it happens.
It can be so sudden.
Yeah. I mean, it literally can be walking along the street almost, and then you're sort of, and this kind of thing. So I think that's a really important point to get over, I think, about the nature of the mental illness. And as you said, the going down can be very quick, but the coming back up is the long bit, as it were. That's the bit that takes the time. And as you say, it's the wrong way round normally for a dramatic impact. But you're absolutely right here. So, yeah.
But I think, thankfully, in context of the album, it works very well.
Yeah.
And just quickly as well, to say to everyone, like right now, I'm back in hospital. I don't know if I already mentioned that tonight, but and I recorded this album a few weeks ago. Life was objectively perfect, and then suddenly I was back in hospital within a day's notice. That's how quickly that this mental illness can strike people. So again, just giving more context.
No, I think one of the things that I think is really important here, and I think we've addressed it a number of times, I think with other composers and other LGBT people as well, is that these things are more common than you think.
Yeah,
I think people having these episodes, and I don't know about you. I'm going to put my own thing out here for mental health here, because and it may not be to everyone's liking, but it is a much harder sell, if you like, to people to get help for, and than it is if you have a heart attack or you broke a leg or something. That is really easy to get help for. If you have a mental health illness, you can be lucky and get good care, but for a lot of people, it's real struggle to get good mental care, and it's a big failure on systems that we have. I think that happens, and that's my soapbox speech for the day. But I think
it's really important, to say that, though. In Australia, we're lucky that we have a government-funded healthcare system. In places like America, I've heard stories, or the US, I should say, to clarify. There is no support if you don't have money. And that's how you end up with, so many people who are on the streets as well, because they cannot live healthily. They cannot afford care. They cannot work because they're and that also kind of ties into why this project is so important to me. It's not just an album about my journey, but I'm trying to get the word to people out there who might not know. Because especially in the classical world, mental illness is very looked over. People really downplay it, from performance, musicians who have it, that really look down upon if they're open about it and they don't just get in line and play. So I'm really trying to do my best to create some level of dialogue around that.
Yeah. And I must say, in my own personal experience, I mean, I've suffered from depression, gender dysphoria for a number of years. And one of the things that I found when I went into a recovery for a while, this was some years ago, was that when I came back from that into work, a lot of people treated you differently. It was like you had a contagious disease that you could pass on to somebody just by being in the room. And if this piece can do anything towards shedding light on that, I think it's done its job, and I really, really just hope that succeeds. Anyway, let's get back to music.
I just want to say I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry that you had that experience. It's disgusting.
Look, we've all had, and I think it's common, I think. And it is a common experience, as you said, with musicians, with everybody, that it's a common experience, and we need to get that word out to people that it isn't like that. So let's go back to music, because people are here to listen to music as well. We'll take a quick listen to Never Alone, and then we'll come back and you can tell us about that piece, Matt. Okay, so we've just listened to Never Alone. So, Matt, could you tell us a little bit about this piece, please?
Yeah, so this one, we're kind of moving into the beginning of recovery, I guess. So we've come from that very dark point at the beginning. Never Alone is kind of this idea that depression, mental illness, really good at tricking us into believing we don't have anyone. So anyone who's had experienced depression knows that really well. You can believe your family are against you. You don't have any friends. And this piece, to me, was really just trying to get that feeling of it's okay to feel like that, but it's also not true. There are people who are there and supporting you throughout your journey.
You know, I'm going to say things which are probably just going to support this. I mean, it's absolutely true. You always think you're the only person that can deal with this, in that there is nobody who has any connection to you in any way. And I felt the piece brought that out nicely. Well, Jacob, what about your feelings on this one?
Yeah, I think we talk about the importance of art. We talk about the importance of like what it is we're doing, and telling specific individual complex stories is the most important thing that we can do with art. And so the ability to share this experience as a like a record of your own experience, which is important, but also as like a beacon of hope for other people going through similar experience. Like, that's why we do this. This is why we like do art and make music, is so that we can share that with other people, and people can have that experience for themselves, and it's cathartic on some level for the people who do it. And I'm sure, I mean, you might have different thought on this, but like I'm sure there's a part of this that creating this feels like excising some portion of these feelings into a different space, that there's you know, laying it bare in front of you feels different than internalizing it, that like having the music be present out in the real world is a different feeling than holding that sound and feeling in. But it's just so genuinely nice to hear the backstory and your connection to why you wrote this. It is so important to hear the music because it's lovely and beautiful, but to hear why it's lovely and beautiful and complex and rich. And yeah, there's really no question there. It's nice to have you here to explain this, and have you like enumerate why you wrote it and how you wrote it and what each piece takes the listener through, takes you through.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, first of all. It was very nice to hear from both of you in kind of how these pieces are already resonating with you. But and that's just such a big thing about this, is that yes, it's my story, but I know it's other people's story, and I want them to hear that and feel comfort and know that they're not alone. There are so many people on our side. There are people who are trying to do better for mental health support and all sorts of things. And, so I cannot remember, have we already discussed the Kickstarter or not?
No, we were going to get to that in a little bit, but yeah, let's talk about that now. So this came up. Tell us about how this whole piece came about to be, put into reality.
Okay, so as I said, the original album came out. I just looked it up. It came out in 2019. What year are we in now, anybody?
2022.
You were right. 3 years ago. Yeah.
3 years. Right. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
Just a reminder to all the lovely listeners, I am still going through ECT right now, so if my brain is a bit fuzzy, that is why. So it was originally released with just sample libraries, because that's where I was. I hadn't even recorded Cassini yet. I think it happened very shortly after. And then, so it came out. I was hospitalized 2 more times. And then I think... Oh no, my memory is really fuzzy and I'm so sorry. At some stage, I decided that I wanted to... I started posting quite a bit on TikTok, just to try and build an audience. And I started getting some really good reception on there from people. I posted my Cassini piece and a few snippets from the album, and there was a lot of talk about people wanting it to hear it recorded live. So I decided to take the biggest risk of my life and launch Kickstarter, which sounds silly, but it's that fear of failure that is the terror there. So I launched a Kickstarter a few months ago to rewrite and re-record this album, basically, knowing that I've had 3 more courses of ECT. It's an ongoing thing for me. It's still a big part of my life, and it's going to be until I die at whatever age. There is no getting around that. And I really wanted to do it justice and share that story with as many people as I could. And it went swimmingly. I met over the target, which was amazing. I don't think I was really expecting it to happen. I think part of me was like, is this just a manic dream? Like, should I be doing this? Is this a bad idea? But it all worked out, and that's how it came through. So then I spent a few months reorchestrating everything, because again, it's that idea of live musicians versus what I can play on my laptop. I want to make sure it's fun and enjoyable and rich. And then, I think it was a month and a half ago that we had the recording session, and I'm back in hospital, but I've been kind of piecing everything together as I go. And so that's the pieces you've been listening to tonight are from the live recording, which is really exciting. It's a bit of a premiere, if you will.
Yeah. We've got a premiere. It's great. I must admit that I think you underestimate your popularity with the Kickstarter. It went like wildfire. I mean, I looked at it a few days, probably a week or so after you sent me a link, and it had already shot through the roof, and it was just fantastic. So, I think it's people realize the importance there of what you were doing, Matt. So it was good to see.
Which I'm very thankful for, and I'm so thankful, to everyone who was sharing it and talking about it. And I even got a little bit of, coverage in magazines around town and stuff about it, which is good because, again, it's that idea of I'm not just making an album for the sake of it. I'm pushing for conversations around mental health. And once the album itself is released, 50% of all profits are going to be continuously donated to charities in Australia focusing on mental health crisis support, because it's still really hard to get support when you need it, because it's overcrowded, basically, as I'm sure all mental health systems across the world are after the last few years. So.
I mean, it certainly touched a nerve with people, because I saw some of the comments on the Kickstarter, and also just, people that I talked to and I saw on various things and this kind of thing. I think it caught the imagination of people who wouldn't normally listen to classical music or be interested in it because of the content of it. And I think again, we come back to the importance of the content, I think, to people. And I think that, I guess we're running this theme through it here. That's the key thing here is that the it is such an important topic and such an important subject. So I think that was fantastic.
Yeah.
So with Never Alone, we've got over this idea. And I must just say to listeners that we're playing 5 little extracts, but there's a lot of it missing. So it is kind of an early stage listening to it, and there's lots of other parts in it. So we're sort of skipping along the journey here. And the next part is we're going to listen to is This Too Shall Pass, which is, of course, the name of the whole album. So we've moved along the journey here a little bit further, Matt.
So in running order, this is the very next track after Never Alone. But this is, as you said, the title track, and it's also kind of our midway point of, I guess, that acceptance of knowing, sure, things are terrible and I feel like I would rather be dead right now. But I've also, we can tell from past experiences that these emotions will pass. And that's something that's really important in psychology. It's spoken a lot, especially with things like bipolar, in knowing that your emotions now aren't forever. So being able to kind of talk yourself through that, which is not always successful, obviously, because when you're severely suicidal, for instance, it doesn't matter if you're going to say, I'll feel better in 2 months. Right now, your brain is telling you to die. And that is a horrible place to be. And I don't think there's any way I could write a piece that could fix that. But at least, This Too Shall Pass is just trying to get through a minute at a time and just surrendering to trying to get better, because that's all you can do.
I think what you said there about getting through a minute at a time is kind of the important bit here. It's like when you're in this mood, you can't look forward. I mean, it is impossible to look forward, especially if you're suicidal. You can't. I mean, you're not looking. So just getting through the next few seconds is kind of key. If you can survive the next second, then you've got the next second, and you can. It's almost like you're breaking time down into these little tiny chunks just to get through.
Yeah, and that's something I've had to do a lot in my own life. Just, count out 15 seconds and try and make it through. And then, you make it through enough. Hopefully, whatever medication you're on will either send you to sleep and you won't have to fight all that moment, or you'll see your psychologist. You'll get support in whatever way it is. But just, it's so important because people aren't told it very often, which sounds silly as well. But that idea of just trying to get through the smallest time you can and just surrendering and accepting something that I've been learning recently, as I continue my own psychology, to work through my own thoughts, which is, still important. I still get ECT, but having a psychologist is still important. Having care workers is still important. And it's this theory of acceptance of your emotions. So saying, yes, I feel like dying right now, and that's okay. I don't have to act on it, but I'm allowed to feel that way, and feeling bad about that is only going to make me feel worse. And again, that's what this track is really about. It's that acceptance and kind of just trying to get through without any expectations of getting better or worse, just existing.
Okay, well, let's take a listen to that. This is This Too Shall Pass. Okay, so that was This Too Shall Pass. Let's move on again through the journey a little bit, and the next bit we're going to talk about is a next. I don't think it's the next part in the sequence, but it's called First Light. So a little bit about that for us, Matt, please.
Funnily enough, it is again the next in the sequence.
There you go. Sorry about that.
So this piece really is written for a very, very specific moment in my own recovery. So during my very first course of electroconvulsive therapy, we were about 5 courses through. I'd just had my session for that morning. I'd come back to, I was sitting outside the hospital grounds having a smoke and a coffee. It's who I am, don't judge me. And the clouds parted and I felt the sun. And I felt the sun properly for the first time in about 6 months. So you said you've experienced depression, Sammy, so you might know that kind of everything's subdued. You don't notice weather as much. You don't feel warmth. You're just a shell. But for this moment, when the clouds parted, it was like I'd never experienced being in the sun before until that moment. Like it was I can still remember how warm and rich it was. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, things are starting to improve. And this piece is based very explicitly on that one moment.
Wow. When you were writing this whole music, as we said before, you it all comes out of your head in a sort of like just a continual fashion, as it were. But how much planning of a whole structure did you do? I mean, was it like, okay, I'm going to work this way through the journey, or was it just kind of like just came out and you knew what it was going to be like?
It's actually a very good question. A little bit of combination of both. So there was kind of, when I decided that this was what I was writing and what the overarching thought was for it, I'd kind of come up with a rough idea of the general emotional level of the story, if that makes sense. So like a really rough idea of, we start okay, we drop really quickly and then we slowly build up with a few extra drops. Something like First Light, when I wrote it, it was actually one of the first things I wrote for it. And it was I knew from the moment that I was writing it what it was and where it fit. So I kind of took key moments. So things like This Too Shall Pass, First Light, and One Last Time were the first ones written. And they kind of provided that, I guess, really rough idea of where everything fit. And then I fit things in between that.
From a perspective of your personal journey here, you've kind of had this experience of, I'll say, euphoria. I don't know if it is or not, but when you had this First Light experience, do you kind of take that feeling and hold on to it as where you are trying to get back to? I mean, is it kind of like a place or feeling that you're always, working towards? Does that make sense?
Does make sense. I'm not sure if I do though. Because my concern is if I lock onto one specific feeling, if I'm not feeling that, I'll feel like I'll be battling myself that, I'm not good enough, I'm not well enough yet, kind of thing. It's more kind of just that general feeling of feeling warmth and happiness. So, today I experienced sun again, which was really nice. It wasn't as much and it wasn't as expansive, but it's those smaller clues that I'm starting to make progress back into a wellness state.
I think this is the thing that is really difficult to get over to people, I guess, is how complicated an issue this is. I know maybe it isn't, but it is kind of like, this idea that, you can think about this and it'll be fine. It's almost like it's I don't know, maybe I'm not explaining this very well, but people tend to think you can just think yourself better, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense? I'm not sure I'm saying that in the right way.
Absolutely. And it's, I have that issue with my father, for instance. He is not particularly savvy when it comes to mental health. So for a long time, he thought I was just lazy or just didn't want to do anything kind of thing. And, just to get really dark for 1 second, the very first time I made a full suicide attempt and was hospitalized, he and my mother were on holidays. They came to visit. And I think that was the moment that it actually clicked for him. But it was really frustrating that it took me making a strong attempt on my life for someone to realize, oh, mental health is serious. Again, that's why I'm so open about what I go through now, because I want people to know that it's okay to talk about it, to feel it.
Yeah. And I think one of the issues there is, I'm passing on somebody else's experience that I know of, that the response of people when they actually tried to commit suicide was, oh, you're an attention seeker. And you're just doing it to get attention. And I kind of feel there's kind of this story that's grown up around mental illness, that it is like you're doing oh, look at me, I'm so ill, I need help kind of thing. And I kind of find that very disturbing that people act that way.
Absolutely.
And as you said, you had to, you were driven to despair, and it was only right at the last minute that people actually realized that. And I think that is a really, we're getting very dark here. Jacob, take us out of a little bit of darkness here.
I'm happy to, but like you say, Matt, it is the nature of. There is darkness. The world is like a weird and complicated place, and it's not that you don't feel these feelings, that this is why you wrote the piece. This is where you have sat at different times in your life. And so, I could, sure, but like it's important to that's why the piece exists. Like you say, it's about being frank and honest and clear and upfront about the complexities that a lot of people go through, and it doesn't help anybody to shy away from it or hide it or sweep it under the rug, or it's not going to make it go away for anybody. And so why would we pretend like it doesn't exist and pretend that people aren't going through intense struggles and a very real need for help? I again would say the beautiful thing about music is that it brings like a nuance and complexity to that conversation, that we can then listen to something that is complex and robust and beautiful and colorful and really to verbiage to the struggles that are often so hard to define. It's so hard to talk about what it is people with mental health struggles are feeling, in the sense of like, how do you name that? How do you put a word to that? There may not be a word, but there is music. There is sound and color. And so we should.
And I think that's introduced that piece of music brilliantly, Jacob. Sorry, I interrupted you there. I think you've led us into First Light, so that's fantastic. We'll take a listen.
we have one more to listen to, Rise Above. And I have a feeling I know the sentiment that you were writing from, but tell us about Rise Above.
I think the title is very good at giving an idea of what we're going through with Rise Above. So we're moving into kind of the final third of the album, which again the album is not a continuous up. There's a few dips. So we have Rise Above, and then a track called Sacrifice, and then One Last Time, which is a very, very big dramatic, also the longest track on the album. But Rise Above is all about that idea of just being the best you, is how I want to put it. Because I don't want to say being better or being good. Just the best version of yourself, I think, is really what I wanted to get across there. Because yeah, it feels wrong to tell someone to be better. If you understand what I'm trying to say. But you can always strive to be the best version of yourself, and that's something that I'm really working on, and that's what Rise Above is about. It's about taking. Yeah, I have all these struggles. I mean, I'm back in hospital again this year. I was already in there in March, but I'm taking all the steps I can to be the best version of myself and keep pushing forward. And funnily enough, the track was originally called Keep Pushing Forward, and then we moved it to Rise Above. So it all works in my head. But yeah, I think that gives a nice idea.
Maybe it's me like ascribing something that does or doesn't exist in your music, and like we talked about fluidity and kind of harmonic directions that it goes, but connecting it to the non-linear path of feeling your best self, that it is up and down, that it's sometimes really divergent, that it sometimes goes in places you don't think it's going to go, and suddenly, I think living that non-linear path to being as well as you can be for you is exemplified in your music. There's a really beautiful, honest fluidity about where your scores go. And I wonder, I mean, maybe we've been circling around it and we've been talking about it, but like, do you think about that as you write, that you're, you're writing you're telling a story. You say that you want to always have your music tell the story that you want it to tell. When you're actually writing and sitting down, even if you're not aware, you go into that trance state. Like, are you putting that on paper intentionally, or is that like a happenstance of just the way you write?
I think it's just a happenstance, which is a very disappointing answer, but yeah, I honestly don't know. I'm so sorry.
No, fair enough. It's maybe a question that like can't be answered either. That like,
I think there's I mean, when I write, it needs to be honest to myself, and that's where everything comes from. Like, I think there are times I have a lot of unfinished pieces. Especially, stuff that was written for the album that never made it because, for whatever reason, it wasn't truthful enough for me. Which making people understand that about instrumental music can probably sound very weird, because it's not like you're writing an autobiography and you need it. The words are very, very explicit about what you're discussing. But when I'm writing, if something doesn't feel truthful or emotionally honest, I never finish it. I just give up because I know that it's not what I want it to be. And it's never no amount of tweaking is going to get it to that because the starting point was unhonest.
I kind of thought that this is your autobiography, though, isn't it? I mean, it's the musical autobiography. I mean, essentially, that's it is that I mean, it is that. It is your autobiography.
Yeah.
It isn't somebody else's story. It's not a made up story. It is actually you, and this is coming out
like
of
it's
you.
It's not an amalgamation of other stories. It's one very specific story that, unfortunately for me, just keeps repeating due to the nature of my illness. It is entirely truthful of myself, and that's why the tracks, once you sit there and listen to the full album, hopefully you'll be able to, the listeners will be able to experience exactly what's happening and understand this interview in far more context. Just because every track leads through the story, I think, in a very honest and deep way.
I think an interesting thing that kind of just occurred to me a little bit here is that as we're talking, we've talked about personal story and all that kind of thing. But I actually think you've captured a lot of other people's stories at the same time. Not just people with the same with being bipolar and this kind of thing, but people with depression, people maybe in poverty. I mean, I think I think you've kind of captured, I don't want to say a basic tenet of humanity. That sounds a bit pompous, but you know what I mean? It's kind of like you've captured something there that is for me a little bit deeper than just it's your story is deep enough, but it's almost like you've captured something else there, which I think is why I think this will appeal to a lot of people. It's in a way, it's a lot of people's stories that have different experiences.
Honestly, I hope you're correct, because I think the most important thing to me is having people, why can I not find the word I'm looking for? Really relate to my music. This album is so important. That's why the Kickstarter, a lot of the comments, as you said, Sammy, on the Kickstarter, people who either had their own mental health journeys or just related to music in some way. And I can't wait. I really cannot wait for the full release of the album and to share it with people and, if nothing else, remind them that they're not alone in what they go through.
So, people want to listen to it, Matt. When is it coming out, do you think? I mean, I know you probably can't give a definitive answer, and how do they get to listen?
So, good question. I'm still not 100% sure of exact date, unfortunately, just because of everything going on with my own current hospitalization. On October the 3rd, so in 2 Mondays away, First Light is being released as a single. That will be on all streaming platforms, so people can go and listen to that. There's also will be a few snippets and things put up both on my Facebook and my YouTube composer page. So that's just Matthew J. Webster, composer. And then once I know the direct date of the album, I will let you guys know as well, and we'll go from there. But yeah, unfortunately, it was supposed to be a much easier release. Wasn't expecting to be back in hospital. Is what it is.
And it's keeping the tension up for the release, so that's kind of
absolutely.
Yeah. Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for taking the time with all the things that are going on. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
I've had a wonderful time. It has been excellent speaking to you both, so thank you.
Thank you. It was so nice to meet you, and I can't wait for everybody to hear your music. I'm so thrilled.
Thank you.
And we'll of course play out with Rise Above. So here's Rise Above by Matt Webster from the album This Too Shall Pass, which hopefully we'll see fairly soon. So that's all for this episode. You've been listening to the Classical Queer Podcast, and Jake and I look forward to being with you next month. The incidental music is courtesy of Jared Miller, and the show was produced by Samantha Jane.